In a world that never stops asking to be seen, silence has become suspicious. We live inside glowing rectangles that reward visibility. We're taught quietly but constantly that a life only counts once it's witnessed. If you didn't post it, if no one reacted to it, if it didn't leave a trace on a feed, did it really happen? And then there are the ghosts, profiles frozen in time. No stories, no updates, no proof of movement. When we stumble onto these empty feeds, our minds rush to fill in the blanks. They must be struggling. They must be disconnected. Maybe they don't have much of a life. But what if that interpretation says more about us than it does about them? What if that silence isn't absence but choice? Because emptiness online doesn't always mean emptiness inside. Sometimes it means a life that isn't organized around being watched. A person who didn't translate their experiences into content, who didn't pause a moment to ask how it would look from the outside. And that can feel unsettling in a culture where visibility equals value. The idea that someone could be living fully, laughing, loving, growing without leaving evidence behind, challenges the unspoken rule we've all learned to follow. So before we assume those ghosts are missing out, it's worth asking a harder question. What if they didn't disappear? What if they simply chose not to perform? At some point, without a clear moment of agreement, life stopped being something we lived and started becoming something we presented. The shift was subtle. Cameras got better, platforms got louder, and slowly, the line between experience and exposure began to blur. We didn't just go places anymore. We documented them. We didn't just feel things, we framed them. Life became a series of moments, waiting to be validated by an audience. In this age of performance, visibility is treated like proof of existence. If others can't see your joy, your success, your growth, it can start to feel as if it doesn't count. So we learn to translate our inner lives into something consumable. A caption, a clip, a highlight. But performance always comes at a cost. When your life is shaped around how it will look, you're no longer fully inside it. Part of you steps back, observing yourself in real time. Is this interesting enough? Is this impressive enough? Will this land? The moment becomes split, half-lived, half-managed. And the pressure doesn't come from any single app. It comes from a culture that quietly equates being seen with being valuable, where stillness looks like stagnation, where privacy is mistaken for a lack of confidence. So we perform not because we're shallow, but because we've been conditioned to believe that being unnoticed means being irrelevant. In a world like this, choosing not to perform isn't laziness or disengagement. It's a quiet refusal. And for some people, it's the first step back into a life that feels like their own. To understand why some people step away from posting, we first have to understand what posting actually does to the brain. Every notification, every like, comment, or share triggers a small release of dopamine. Dopamine isn't happiness. It's motivation. It's the chemical that says, pay attention to this, do it again. And for a moment, it feels good. You feel noticed, approved of, real. But the brain quickly adapts. What once felt rewarding becomes expected. The bar moves. Fewer likes feel like rejection. Silence feels personal. Without realizing it, many people begin tying their sense of worth to an algorithm they don't control. A good day becomes one where engagement is high. A bad day is one where it isn't. This is how validation quietly turns into dependence. Psychologically, this is the difference between an external and an internal source of self-esteem. When validation comes from the outside, your emotional stability is always at risk. Your mood rises and falls based on how you're received. You don't just share your life, you submit it for evaluation. Now look at the people who don't post. They aren't immune to pleasure. They just don't use public reaction as a measuring tool for their inner world. Their sense of "this mattered" comes from direct experience, not digital feedback. They know they had a meaningful conversation because they felt understood, not because anyone witnessed it. They know they're making progress because something inside them shifted, not because it was applauded. This reflects what psychology calls an internal locus of control. Their sense of value is generated inward, not outsourced. And when you stop needing strangers to confirm your reality, something profound happens. You stop performing for them. You stop packaging moments for approval. You start living them fully, without checking how they land. The absence of posts isn't emptiness. It's a life no longer organized around the chase for validation. Before silence becomes a choice, it is often a sensation. Long before someone decides, consciously, "I don't want to post," their nervous system has already made a quiet calculation. It has learned through experience what feels safe and what doesn't. For many people, being seen doesn't feel neutral. It feels exposing. If you grew up in an environment where attention came with criticism, control, or ridicule, visibility learned to register as risk. Being noticed meant being judged. Being expressive meant being corrected. Privacy wasn't respected, it was invaded. Over time, the body adapts. It learns to stay small, to stay contained, to protect what's internal. This is why silence isn't always avoidance. Often, it's regulation. From a nervous system perspective, not posting can be a way of maintaining equilibrium, reducing stimulation, avoiding the subtle hypervigilance that comes with being perceived by hundreds or thousands of eyes. Even when those eyes are invisible, the body still responds as if it's being watched. Social media asks us to keep ourselves in a semi-performative state at all times, to be available, reactive, open to interpretation. For a regulated nervous system, that may feel manageable. For a sensitized one, it can feel exhausting. So some people opt out not because they're hiding, but because they're listening. They notice the tension in their chest when they're about to share something personal, the way their body tightens while waiting for reactions, the low-grade anxiety that follows visibility, and instead of pushing through it, they choose containment. This isn't weakness. It's intelligence under pressure. When the nervous system leads, it prioritizes safety over signaling, grounding over performance, presence over projection. And in a culture that confuses exposure with authenticity, this kind of silence can look strange. But often, it's the body doing what it's always done best, protecting the self before the mind even catches up. There's a quiet pattern most of us recognize, even if we've never named it. The things that feel most solid in our lives are often the least announced. In psychology and behavioral science, this is described through signaling theory, the idea that we broadcast traits we want others to believe we have. Confidence, success, happiness, love. But signaling has a paradox built into it. The more urgently something is signaled, the less secure it usually is. This is why the loudest declarations of fulfillment often feel brittle. When happiness needs constant proof, it's usually because it hasn't settled yet. When love needs to be repeatedly displayed, it's often searching for reassurance. What's truly stable doesn't need to convince. People who don't post intuitively understand this. They don't feel compelled to document their joy, because their joy isn't asking to be validated. It already feels real. Their relationships don't need captions to exist. Their progress doesn't need witnesses to count. This isn't about superiority. It's about saturation. When something is deeply internalized, the impulse to externalize it weakens. There's no anxiety pushing it outward. No doubt asking to be soothed through reaction. In contrast, signaling often comes from an unconscious place, a need to anchor a fragile sense of self by seeing it reflected back. If others see this, maybe it's true. But when truth is lived instead of announced, it becomes quieter, less performative, more embodied. So when you encounter someone who seems invisible online, consider this. They may not be withholding. They may simply be full, and fullness doesn't reach outward for proof. It rests. Being seen is often framed as a gift. Visibility is sold as connection, opportunity, relevance. But there is a cost to constant exposure that rarely gets acknowledged. When you are always visible, you are always monitoring yourself. Part of your attention is no longer on what you're feeling or doing, but on how it appears. You adjust in real time. You edit your reactions. You shape your personality around what will land well. This creates a subtle but persistent split. The one who lives and the one who watches. Over time, that split becomes exhausting. Psychologically, being perceived activates self-consciousness. A small amount can sharpen awareness. Too much turns into vigilance. You begin scanning for feedback, anticipating judgment, preparing explanations. Even positive attention carries weight. It asks you to maintain a version of yourself that others now expect. This is the hidden tax of visibility. Your inner life starts to thin out. Not because nothing is happening, but because there's no space left to feel it privately. Everything is immediately externalized, processed through imagined reactions before it's even understood internally. For many people, this leads to identity fatigue. You don't quite know who you are when no one is watching, because you've spent so long being shaped by being seen. Privacy interrupts this cycle. When moments remain unshared, they can settle. They can belong to you long enough to form meaning. There's no pressure to perform consistency, no obligation to explain change. You're allowed to contradict your past self without an audience keeping score. This is why some people quietly step back from posting, not out of secrecy, but out of self-preservation. They're not rejecting connection. They're protecting coherence. Because a life lived entirely in public often loses its depth, not from emptiness, but from overexposure. There's a moment that happens so quickly we rarely notice it. You're in the middle of something ordinary but alive. A meal, a conversation, a view, and a thought interrupts. This would make a good post. In that instant, your attention shifts. You step slightly out of the experience and into the role of observer, not fully gone, but no longer fully there. Psychologists call this cognitive offloading. When we rely on devices to hold our memories, the brain records less. We remember that we captured something, but not how it felt. The texture fades, the emotional imprint weakens. We keep the image, but lose the atmosphere. Curating a moment asks different questions than living one. Is the lighting right? Is the framing flattering? Will this make sense to someone who wasn't here? Each question pulls you further away from the sensation you can never recreate. The people who don't post make a different trade. They allow moments to be unoptimized. A laugh that isn't documented. A sunset seen without a lens between the eyes and the sky. A conversation that dissolves without proof it ever happened. These experiences don't survive as content, but they live on as memory, as felt continuity. This is where the joy of missing out comes in. Not missing life, but missing the urge to package it. When you stop curating, time slows. Moments become thicker. You remember not because you saved something, but because your nervous system was fully present. And the truth is, some memories only exist if they aren't interrupted. Once you step out to capture them, they're already changing. Some things can only be kept by letting them pass through you, unrecorded. Not all silence comes from stability. It's important to name this, because romanticizing withdrawal can be just as harmful as misunderstanding it. Sometimes, not posting isn't a sign of peace, it's a signal of pain. There are people who disappear not because they feel full, but because they feel inadequate. Their silence is shaped by comparison, not contentment, by the quiet belief that their life isn't interesting enough, successful enough, or presentable enough to be seen alongside everyone else's highlight reel. In these cases, silence isn't regulating the nervous system, it's avoiding exposure altogether. The difference isn't always visible from the outside, but it's clear on the inside. The healthy kind of silence still includes engagement with life. There are friendships, routines, moments of curiosity and connection, just not on display. The unhealthy kind comes with contraction, isolation, a shrinking sense of possibility. Isolation 1. Otaltha, as on the 18. The question isn't do you post or not. It's what happens when you're not being seen. Do you feel grounded, free, and present? Or do you feel numb, disconnected, and stuck? Silence, rooted in strength, expands your life offline. Silence, rooted in shame, makes it smaller. Understanding this distinction matters, because the goal isn't to disappear, it's to feel safe enough to exist, whether anyone is watching or not. And sometimes, the bravest move isn't staying silent, it's allowing yourself to be supported, even if that means being seen again, slowly and on your own terms. Reclaiming your life from the algorithm doesn't require deleting everything or disappearing completely. It begins with awareness. Before you share something, pause and ask yourself the first question. If no one could see this, would I still want it? This question cuts through performance. It reveals whether a moment is chosen for your own experience or selected for how it might be received. The second question is quieter, but more revealing. Am I sharing from fullness or from fear? Fullness doesn't rush. It doesn't need reassurance. Fear does. Fear wants to be mirrored, validated, stabilized by reaction. Noticing the difference helps you understand what you're really seeking. And the third question brings it back to boundaries. What parts of my life feel safer when they stay mine? Some moments lose their meaning once they're exposed. Some relationships grow better in privacy. Some transitions need darkness before they can be understood. These questions aren't meant to shame you into silence. They're meant to return agency, to remind you that you get to choose what becomes public and what remains personal. The algorithm thrives on reflex. Your life deepens with intention. Every time you pause, instead of posting automatically, you shift the balance away from being shaped and back toward choosing. And that choice, repeated quietly, is how a life becomes your own again. There is a particular kind of strength that rarely announces itself. It doesn't show up in feeds or timelines. It doesn't ask to be affirmed. It lives in the moments no one claps for the meal enjoyed without a photo, the conversation that stays between two people, the decision that changes everything without leaving a trace online. A life that doesn't need witnesses is not a small life. It's a grounded one. When you no longer organize your experiences around being seen, something settles inside you. Your attention returns to where you are. Your emotions don't have to perform. Your identity isn't constantly being updated for an audience. You're allowed to change quietly, without explaining yourself in public. This kind of life isn't louder or more impressive than others. It's simply more coherent. What you feel, what you do, and who you are begin to align without needing external confirmation to hold them together. And that alignment brings a form of peace that approval never could. So, if you felt the urge to pull back, to keep certain things private, to live a little more off-screen, there's nothing wrong with you. You may just be listening to something deeper than the noise. If any part of this video put words to something you felt but never quite named, you're not alone. This channel exists for for the quiet psychological patterns that often go unnoticed. Consider subscribing if you want more reflections like this, thoughtful, grounded, and human. And if you feel comfortable, share in the comments. What is one part of your life that feels better when it stays unwitnessed? Sometimes, the most meaningful lives are the ones that don't need to be seen to be real.